Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
You might remember, we've just had a referendum in Britain's membership of the EU. It was only 3 weeks ago, although it might seem a lot longer.
It does.
But there have been calls from some quarters for a second referendum, including one this morning from Labour leadership challenger Owen Smith. Later in the year, MPs will debate a petition on Parliament's website calling for a second referendum after it was signed by more than 4 million people. The idea has already been debated in the House of Lords. Let's have a listen to Labour's Una King talking about what she thinks should happen.
In the interest of democracy, the British people must be given the chance to vote on the deal to leave the EU once we finally know what that deal is and what that deal costs in terms of our economy, our jobs, our pensions, our future, our global influence, our geographical borders, and last but certainly not least, our precious identity as a tolerant, open-facing nation. I say, let the people decide.
Well, that was Una King in the House of Lords, and to discuss the possibility of a second referendum or vote, I'm joined by the Labour MPs David Lammy and Frank Field. David voted to remain in the EU and Frank voted to leave, just to make that clear. Now, the online petition, David Lammy, that calls for a second EU referendum will be debated, as we said, in Parliament after it was signed by 4.1 million people. But why? What's the point? There's not going to be a second referendum.
Well, we have a petition process, and actually that's a record number of people for any petition I think that we've had in the House of Commons. So that's the first thing, the people want it.
Fine.
The second thing is to say, Joe, there is no plan. When we say Brexit means Brexit, it's absolutely not clear what the plan is. There are a number of very remorseful leavers who say, we're not going to get 250 million a week. How can you get free trade without free movement? All of these issues. So on that basis, those that have signed the petition say, actually, can we have a second referendum on the plan if one emerges? Now, there's another view, and the other view is it should come back to Parliament. All of that is out there, and ultimately, we should actually be having debates and votes in the House of Commons. Right,
let's just be clear, though. The Petitions Committee has said the debate did not mean it was supporting the call for a second referendum, i.e. rerunning the referendum that we have just had. It was too late to change the referendum rules. That's one thing. Having the debate is fine. What you're suggesting is having a referendum on the deal or the plan that is then actually put together by the Theresa May government. You support that, do you?
No, my primary view is actually it should come back to Parliament. My primary view is there should be no Article 50 without Parliament acting, but ultimately the plan has to either come back to Parliament or back to the people.
What do you say, Frank Field? It's an awful lot of people, 4.1 million people. Then you add people who have got buyer's remorse and the plan that no one knows what it looks like. Why shouldn't Parliament be the body that decides whether we actually trigger Brexit?
Well, there were 17 million voting to actually come out. It's not surprising that people may be wanting a second view on this. I'm not against Parliament having a debate on that, but I think people have noticed today the government's moved on. The government has actually shaped itself about implementing the pledge that people actually wanted in that referendum. And we've got the key ministries announced first about how we disengage from our current relationship with Europe to forge a new one. Right. So the idea that the government's going to go back on that is just living in cuckoo land.
But it's true to say it was advisory, though, isn't it? I mean, the referendum result was advisory. That's true.
Well, you can say that, but I mean...
But it is the fact, isn't it?
Well, let's look what Mrs May doesn't think it's advisory. Mrs May is actually acting on it. Her key first appointments were about implementing the referendum pledge. The idea that it was merely advisory, given the state that politics is in and the distrust of politicians, I think is an absurd idea.
You need to catch up, David Lammy. I mean, everybody does. It was a decisive vote. You may not like it, and those 4.1 million people may not like it, but it has happened, and the government is moving ahead with trying to turn it, as they would argue, into something positive. There's no going back.
You cannot describe a vote in which 67% of those eligible to take part did not vote for it as decisive. 16 million people in Britain did not vote to leave the EU, and 13 million people stayed at home, so I imagine they like the status quo. If we want to remain a united country, then actually let's listen to the advice, but let's recognise that a larger chunk of the country did not go for this. The economy is going south. We have no trade deals with any other country in the world. It will take quite a long time to negotiate them. Let us pause, let us reflect, let us think very carefully about the future of this country. Yes, accept the advice, but accept that many millions of people did not vote for Brexit. Many more than did, in fact.
The last thing we want to do is pause. A decision has been made, the government is actually carrying it out, and it's crucial we now get on implementing that agenda. The agenda, I think, is something different, where the tension is going to be, and it's going to be particularly acute for the Labour Party. The country has voted to leave. Overwhelmingly, Labour members of Parliament in favour of staying. So that's why David quite rightly says, let's bring it back to Parliament.
I know Owen Smith, one of the leadership challengers, has said he wants a second vote once a Brexit deal is agreed.
That's the same as David's, and I think there's no, I mean, it's just, well, I'm speechless, the idea of people thinking that's relevant to what's actually happening at the present time. The key thing will be that the people have actually voted to come out, and there is a majority in Parliament that actually wants to remain. The tension will be, how does the government manage the exit strategy?
We've run out of time.